welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out a classic overdrive pedal that I feel like doesn't always get the love that it deserves. This is a pedal that you will no doubt have heard of, but tends to get a bit lost in the conversation with other overdrive pedals, especially things like clones and tube screamers, etc. But I am of course talking about the Boss Super Overdrive SD-1. So this pedal was first released back in 1981 and has been in the Boss catalogue continuously since then. Unlike a lot of other drive pedals that use symmetrical clipping in their circuits, this pedal uses asymmetrical clipping. Now this was done in an attempt to make this pedal sound more like a tube amp overdriving, although that's up for debate whether that's actually true. But what it does do is give you both even and odd order harmonics within the distortion, which gives this pedal its slightly thicker sound that people know it for. Certainly when you compare it to something like a tube screamer anyway. And this pedal does get compared to the tube screamer quite a lot for quite a good reason. Now, although this pedal does have more gain than a tube screamer, it's very much in that similar category, and it's also often a go-to choice, like the tube screamer, for putting on a low gain setting in front of an already driven amp just to tighten things up and push that compression a bit more. But we'll get into that a bit later. So if we take a look at the controls on the pedal, it's very much as you'd expect from an early Boss pedal. It's the classic 3-knob design, those 3 controls being level, tone and drive. All pretty self-explanatory. Level gives you your overall output, drive is the amount of gain you're adding, and then, as is the case often with Boss pedals, the tone control controls how much top end you're rolling off of the signal. So as you'd expect from Boss, very straightforward and, you know, exactly what you'd expect. So let's check out some tones. In the intro you heard my Gibson SG Standard, which was in drop D tuning. I'm now going to switch over to my Fender Telecaster so you can hear some single coil tones. So now with the Tele, we're going through the pedal and then into the amp, which is everything you've heard so far in this video, and that is my Vox AC15, which is then going into my 2 Notes Torpedo Reload 2 load box and using a GGD Zilla Cabs Greenback IR. With the pedal now switched off, the Telecaster on its own sounds like this. And then if I switch the pedal back on with the same settings that you heard the SG played with in the intro, it sounds like this. So let's take a slightly deeper look into this pedal and the controls. As I always like to do, I'm just going to leave the level where it is. But let's take a look at the tone and the gain. We'll leave the drive at about 12 o'clock for now, and we'll just go through the tone control. So if I roll that all the way down, it sounds something like this. And then if I roll it all the way up, and of course then you've got everything in the middle. I find that actually around 12 o'clock is really the sweet spot for this. And it does have somewhat of a vintage vibe. I found that I've been playing quite a few little licks like that are sort of Led Zeppelin and that kind of thing, because it suits that style. But maybe that's just going through the Vox as well. But let's move on to the drive control. So you've heard it quite a lot now at 12 o'clock. I'm just going to roll it back to about 9 o'clock, and that sounds something like this. And then if we roll it all the way off, so it does kill it almost completely. You can just hear a tiny little bit of breakup. If I hold a chord though, you'll hear that the gain does come in quite quickly. And then if we roll it all the way up to say 3 o'clock, and then cranking it all the way sounds something like. So this pedal does have a good amount of gain in it, and using it like this just as a regular straightforward drive pedal, I think it's really solid. I know some people might say that it's a little bit boring, but I think it is just a great solid staple overdrive sound that's going to go with pretty much any amp, and is just, as we kind of come to expect from sort of these more classic Boss pedals, it is really just a solid staple sound. So that's using it just as a traditional overdrive, but I do also want to talk a little bit about, as I mentioned earlier, using it as more of a boost like you would most famously with a tube screamer. So I'm now going to move away from the Vox and I'm going to go over to my Marshall valve state. Now the reason I'm going to do this is because A, the valve state has a lot more gain in it than the Vox does, but B, because I find that with amps like Marshalls that have more of a mid-hump in their EQ range, this is where this pedal really shines. And certainly the reason that I've bought this pedal myself is to use it as an alternative to a tube screamer. Because as we know, the tube screamer has quite a prominent mid-hump in its EQ curve, and it also filters out a lot of the low end. Now with the super overdrive, partly because of that asymmetrical clipping and the added harmonics that you get, it's thicker, but it also filters out a little bit less of the low end. And most importantly, it has a much flatter EQ curve, especially in the mid-range, so you don't get that aggressive mid-boost. And I find that, like I said, with Marshall amps especially, but any sort of amp that has that mid-hump already present, this is where this pedal really shines. So let's switch over to the valve state, and I'm going to switch back to the SG for a bit of humbucker action on this one as well. So the SG into OD2 on the valve state sounds something like this. And then what I've done is I've set the super overdrive up with a very similar tone control, but what I'm doing now is boosting the level quite a lot, but not adding in a whole lot of extra drive. Very much in the same way that you would set up a tube screamer in front of a high gain amp. And so if we turn that on, so just to give you a bit more of a quick A-B, we have without and with. So as you can hopefully hear, there is the obvious boosting gain, because as we saw earlier, actually there is quite a lot of gain in this pedal. But what you can hopefully also hear is that it tightens things up, but also thickens things up a little bit in the low end. And I think that this combination especially is really great, but with something like a plexi as well, it gives you a great sort of more higher gain option. So there we go. That is a look at the Boss SD-1 Super Overdrive. A pedal that I hope you'll now also agree is a pretty solid overdrive pedal on its own, but really shines as a bit of a boost for more mid-focused amps. And of course, with this being a mass-produced classic Boss pedal, you can pick these things up for, 40 quid, 50 quid second hand, which is really a steal. And I think most guitarists would find a great use for this pedal, as it is a great, versatile, solid overdrive pedal. I'm sure a lot of you already knew that, but I think there is quite a lot of guitarists who have also slept on this pedal. So I'm hoping that I've opened a few more eyes there. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments as always. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.